Hello everyone, and welcome to the Dice Commando YouTube channel. I'm Andrew, with you here as always. This is Go Again, a fabulous video cast covering the trading card game Flesh and Blood. This video and others like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. Please show your support with a like and subscribe, and be sure to hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss any new videos. If you want to get involved with the channel, consider becoming a channel member. There are many benefits to channel membership, including access to our Discord, exclusive deck tech and strategy videos, and the opportunity to help create channel content. I want to sincerely thank all our channel members, as I truly couldn't do this without your support. You guys rock. Go Commando. Hello everyone, welcome back to Go Again, a fabulous cast, the Flesh and Blood TCG focused arm on the Dice Commando YouTube channel. I'm Andrew with you here as always, and we're joined today by Josh. How's it going, man?
Going great. How are you, sir?
Doing pretty well. Everyone should know both Josh and I have kids who are relatively close in age on the newborn spectrum, so we're both dealing with late night explosions and all that, so it's great to be able to share that misery and gaming with Josh. So what are we talking about today, man?
Brute, the way and the light of the Fab world.
The way and the light of the Fab world. All right, so yeah, talking Brute today. We'll be right back. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Thanks for joining us again. So I am very happy to introduce Josh Schott to everyone. You may know him on the Discords or the various Facebooks across the gaming world. But yeah, man, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I've been playing. I come from a history mainly of role-playing games, and I first started getting into X-Wing and found out I wasn't ready to deal with the 3D world, and then someone introduced me to Destiny two-player starter, and that's where I got into Destiny right when that came out, and then now my new love is Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, and you're like way into Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, I've been known to go in a little more over my head than I think my skill level was necessarily ready for, but it has given me an opportunity to see a lot of cards, and luckily there's a local group here who's been meeting because they're in a county that thankfully doesn't have as much restrictions play-wise for COVID, so I've got a lot of real-life games in with people who are pretty knowledgeable about the game and learning from them in a semi-competitive format, so I've gotten a lot of reps, especially with Rhinar and Brute, with Kayo, and it's given me a lot of opportunity to learn about how other classes play, even though I'm not the ones playing them. So I feel like I've got a lot of experience under my belt in the last few months.
Yeah, I mean, and that's primarily why we wanted to have you join up, right? So that's the big announcement. Is Josh is You're going to be seeing a heck of a lot more of Josh. He's joining the Dice Commando team from the Fab side, so you're going to be seeing a lot of him, and he's very active on the Discords and stuff. So thanks for taking that bullet for everybody, man.
Oh, absolutely. I'm happy to.
But yeah, so you were telling me, I mean, I don't know if you're still going to twice a week, but for a while there, you had a twice a week opportunity. Um,
Well, the twice a week hasn't been. It's more of a luxury. I have very much a pretty solid 1 day getaway, guilt free with the wife. We have an arrangement with the little ones because we also have a 3-year-old. So I've been playing almost to a great extent Blitz formats because that's what is available on the weeknight that I typically have free. But I have been able to sneak out to a couple events on Saturdays also. Those have mostly been I did a sealed draft. I did a normal draft. I haven't had the opportunity to play constructed, but from what I can tell, Blitz is like construction on hard mode. So I think that the transition would be pretty easy. It would just be more cards.
and when you say constructed, you mean in a tournament format, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a bajillion and a half more games than I get on a daily or on a weekly basis with our current state of affairs, literally in our state. So, no, it's great
Right.
to have that competitive experience. So, what have you been primarily playing, or I guess what's your feeling on the state of things, and what are you primarily playing?
Well, the when I first learned of the game, I had an immediate interest in Rhinar because I associate Rhinar with kind of a barbarian. And when I first started playing D&D with my dad when I was a kid, the first thing I wanted to be at 12 years old was a big bad barbarian. So I've always had an affection for barbarian-like creatures, and so I started with Rhinar in mind, and then when I opened the first pack I ever opened from a booster pack, I got the legendary Scabskin Leathers and took that as a sign. And I've kind of run with that where I've played almost exclusively Brute of some way, shape, or form, playing Rhinar almost exclusively in the Blitz tournaments that we've been doing weekly. And I've, over the last 3 or 4 weeks, transitioned to Kayo, and I think I like Kayo even better. So the only times I haven't played, I tried Ninja one night. I didn't feel like it was for my skill level. So there's a lot of classes I'll probably end up will have a lot of reps in the game, but Rhinar had a very easy, I feel like, learning curve of at least learning the basics of what to do in a turn and how to plan a turn. Whereas other classes like Ninja and I think even like Dorinthea, you have to know your triggers and how to plan them out, and that wasn't good for me for my how I like to learn. So Rhinar was not only I think a good fit for how it plays, for how I learned the game, but also just character wise, I had an immediate affinity for just kind of that character, the big barbarian guy's gonna hit you in the face.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think your story is pretty similar in terms of focusing in on. I mean, I think that's the way to at least learn this game is to focus in on one hero instead of trying to learn them all, because you really have to learn the style and then kind of learn how the other heroes play by getting beat by them. I mean, that's pretty much what I've been seeing. So
Yeah, and I think that's like when I first learned like the first night was a feel bad night because I was playing people who knew their characters very, playing people who were very experienced, and not to say that they weren't extremely polite and helpful and helped me correct my mistakes or try to do the best that I could, but it is a little overwhelming. And I think the one thing you can do to get past that is not to keep dipping your toes in different classes and feel like this was kind of overwhelming, so maybe this isn't the class for me. I think it's picking a class that you think that you'll like and trying to stick to it to where you learn it, to where you get past those feel bad moments of it's not just you not knowing how to play the game or knowing how to play your own character. You're also having to deal with how to use my character to
sure,
mitigate whatever they're trying
sure.
to do.
Well, yeah, and these days getting the cards too. But no, I think you're right on the nose there.
That's fair.
So yeah, let's go ahead then. You're the brute man. I have little to no experience playing brute other than just the starter deck and learning that we couldn't figure out how to correctly discard the cards in the order we wanted to, right? So can you kind of walk us through? So you said you started with Rhinar, which is a good lead into constructed.
Mm-hmm.
So can you kind of start walking us through basically everything you know about brute?
Yeah, I think Brute's another example where I feel like I got a little lucky with the character class that I chose because the deck kind of builds itself. I think out of any other starting class, maybe Dorinthea. I'm not so sure actually. I can't speak to that. I feel like it has less class non-class cards than any other class because it has defense reactions, it has attack reactions, it has instants. Um, so it's very easy to pick. Okay, I have two of these. Let me throw that in there. I have two of these. Let me throw those in there. So the cards that you pick, I think, are almost always going to exclusively be class cards to start, and it's very easy because there's a lot of them are, of course, commons or rares, which are relatively not as rare. And the main trick with building Rhinar is it's very tricky to figure out your spread for red, yellow, blue because a lot of your reds cost three, and you're having to discard a card when you play it. So your card management is I need to have something that pitches for three. I'm going to lose a card when I play this Smash Instinct, for example, because it costs three. Uh, or if I play Wrecker Rump, I'm gonna have to discard a card. It only costs two, but it costs me an extra card, which is like having a two and a one. So it's very hard to figure out the resource curve for Rhinar because a lot of times, uh, if you want to be doing what Rhinar is supposed to be doing, which is intimidating, you have to set up these weird combinations. But one thing that I found that I think I was doing wrong is I felt like early on when I was playing Rhinar, like the big marquee card is Brushing Beatdown, of course, and that's the one where it costs zero, and it gives you a plus two, three, or four to your next brute attack, and it has Intimidate. So the setup there typically is play Barraging Beatdown, play a big meaty card that hopefully has Intimidate too, and then if they block with less than two cards, you get this extra damage. What I've learned is I spent a lot of time trying to play Rhinar, setting up, trying to play beatdowns, like play one from Arsenal, play one from hand, and those are good for like trying to get like a bingo win. But I don't think it's the right play to play Rhinar. As I played him more, I think there's value in just like how in Guardian you don't always want to use Dominate. You don't always want to play multiple Raging Beatdowns or try to intimidate multiple cards out of hand because there's value to I'm only swinging with my club for four, but if you don't block with two cards and overblock essentially, I'm going to get to do four more damage or three more damage. To where you're only using one card to pitch, one card to play Barraging Beatdown, and your club. It's a way to set up a turn where you only have two cards in hand and still get value out of either doing 8 damage or getting two cards out of their hands. And that's something I didn't learn until after really a lot of time of trying to set up these big combos when there was value in sometimes just making your opponent choose 4 damage or 2 cards is already a good turn.
Yeah, so you're just saying consistency is underrated, right?
Well, I think there's certainly value in consistency. It's learning where the value is. I thought the value for the longest time when I was learning Brute and learning the game was trying to set up these multiple intimidation turns where the goal would be to Barraging Beatdown and somehow try to set up 2 more Intimidates to where they only have 1 card, so you automatically get Barraging Beatdown. If you can pull that off, great. But I spent a lot of time in bad turns and bad card management trying to set those up when there's a lot of times where I can block with 2 cards, pitch with something that will let me swing my club after playing Barraging Beatdown. I've saved myself some damage that I normally, earlier when I was learning how to play Brute, I would have taken that damage just so I can set up my 4-card turn. But you don't have to because you can block and still be able to get value out of your turn by forcing 2 cards or 8 damage on your opponent, as an example. That I think you don't learn how you can get more value out of less cards and still be consistently putting out damage until you've gotten a lot of reps.
I see. So, I mean, the typical Brute turn, at least from the layman like myself, is you basically have 1 card to defend with. You pitch, play, and discard, right? I mean, that's like the vanilla
that's
turn,
a lot of your turns are exactly that, yeah. And this is where sometimes where you also have to learn, like, I can block with, because the club is nothing to sniff at. It does 4 damage. It gets extra damage if you've pitched a 6+ card that turn anyways. So there's basically 2 styles of turns. Like you just mentioned, the 3-card turn where you've blocked with 1, pitched with 1, you're going to discard 1 and then play 1 big attack. Like Wrecker Romp only costs 2, hits for 8, 7, or 6. It's a big meaty card. Or you can even get away with the 2-card turn if you have a Barraging Beatdown. But that's kind of the trick is trying to manage your cards to where you're getting value out of most of your turns. Where it gets a little sticky is you can get stuck with a card of reds, and you may not necessarily even be able to afford to play a card, and then you're forced to be in a situation where your only viable option is to pitch 2 cards just to swing the club, which is, I mean, it's not ideal, but it's at least it's something.
Yeah. And then the next question I have for you before we move into your second hero is those turns where you do multiple intimidations, right? Intimidate goes back to their hand at the end, so don't you just get clobbered on the next turn?
Yeah, and that was also something that kind of frustrated me, and I had to learn how to live with that. Is it's not a mechanic where you're getting cards out of their hand permanently, so you are putting yourself in a situation where, yes, I've set myself up to where I can do damage you may not be able to prevent because I'm intimidating you, but that has no effect on your hand. So you there's a certain element of knowing that the only way to, and this is another reason why going back to learning the value of maybe you don't have to intimidate 3 cards, because you'll learn that you can't always just let your opponent have a 4 and 5 card turn and expect to be able to survive the game, or you can't let Dorinthea have multiple actions and multiple attack and defense reactions. At some point, you have to learn the value of the normal standard turn that we're looking for isn't ideal, and what we really could do is use some cards to block, only intimidate to the point of forcing them to choose whether to overblock a relatively weak attack, like a 4 attack, and make them spend 2 cards on it unless they want to take more damage, and get cards out of their hand that way by forcing them to decide if they want to. And sometimes, of course, they'll just take the damage so they can do what they're going to do to you anyways. But there's definitely a learning curve where you can force your opponent to choose and not put it all on yourself to be like, okay, I'm going to try to do the biggest whammy I can to you, knowing that you're going to come at me back at me with 5 cards, and that's just not. It's not setting yourself up for future success. I think to be more successful with Rhinar, especially, you have to put pressure on. And in a way, the intimidation mechanic doesn't necessarily pressure your opponent because they know that no matter how much damage you do, as long as they survive the round, they're going to be able to come at you with 5 cards.
Right.
So, or 4 to 5
Right.
cards.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. So, you sent 2 deck lists over to kind of go through as talking points. So, I'll bring up the Rhinar deck list first.
And that one has been modified for the new Crucible of War cards, but it's not as tested as the version I was using prior to Crucible of War. But this is kind of what I was wanting at the time. And with Rhinar, I think you have to go heavy into the intimidate mechanic, just not go crazy with it. Um, you're going to want to use the cards that benefit or work off of Rhinar's ability. And an important thing that I didn't realize when I first was playing is that Rhinar's ability is not limited to once per turn or once per round. So if you have triggers like Blood Rush Bellow or Primeval Bellow, where they increase your attacks and you have to discard a card, and then you play a card that also discards a card, that's double intimidation just from Rhinar's ability.
Oh,
So
interesting.
so basically, if you're gonna play Rhinar, lean into Rhinar and use everything that tries to set up his ability or his mechanics to your benefit, because even intimidating 1 card out of hand makes them, gives them less options for their blocking. Or I've had games where it relies on a certain amount of luck, but if you intimidate the card that they were going to block with and they're stuck with cards they can't block with or don't block for enough, I mean, that's value added. So it's just kind of leaning into almost all of these attacks are 6+. Um, so you're almost always getting your intimidate trigger for any time that you need to discard a card, and that just makes it. I tried early on to try to build attacks to where I wouldn't always have to worry about discarding a card. But then you set yourself up into a situation where, like, I think Reckless Swing as a defensive reaction, it blocks for 4, and then you have to discard a random card. If it's a 6 attack card, you do 2 damage. That can win you a game because people aren't expecting to take damage on their attack. But if you set up your deck to where you're not taking advantage of the full Rhinar suite, so to speak, and you're not having almost exclusively 6 attack cards, then you're not setting yourself up to benefit from that card and what it can do and the surprise damage it can do. And so basically, this deck I think probably has more yellows in it than most of the other characters I've seen with how they build their decks, and a lot of that has to do with a lot of the attacks cost 2 or 3 to play, or worst case scenario, you can always pitch a yellow to attack with the club. So a lot of red, a lot of yellow, and just a little bit of blue in there. And like I said, the building part of the deck is actually relatively easy because a lot of the cards are, if you're going to do the run of mechanic, it's just auto includes. For I think the one card I didn't appreciate enough when I was first playing, and only recently, once Crucible War came out, I started appreciating it much more, was the Blood Rush Bellow. And that's because that card can buff every brute attack for the entire turn. And it's a pay 1, and you discard a random card. And this is where it could end your turn if you don't have only exclusively 6 attack cards in your hand. But under the assumption that you do, and you have your build set up correctly, you pay 1, you discard a card. If it's a 6 cost card that gets discarded, you get the Intimidate from Rhinar, and then you get to draw 2 cards, and all your brute attacks for the rest of the turn are +2. So that's where that card sets up what normally is a go tall, like big meaty attacks, to where you're trying to actually get multiple attacks, and that's where you use things like the leathers to give you extra actions and try to suddenly do 2 or 3 big hits when you've already set up an Intimidate trigger.
I see.
At least one Intimidate trigger.
I see. Well, I'd be interested in seeing one of those combos on video at some point. Hopefully we can make that happen just so I can wrap my head around it.
Oh, yeah.
And then, so thanks for sharing the list. We do appreciate that. And then you had recently, you said, popped over into Kayo. Obviously, Kayo is limited to Blitz, so that's, the Rhinar discussion we just had does apply to constructed within a certain degree. Kayo, of course, does not at all. But you said you've been having a lot of fun with him, and you and I have played some games on TTS that are actually on the channel with Kayo.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I think I like KO better. It's been harder to learn how to build KO compared to Rhino, because Rhino is very much just kind of go down the list and pick the cards that you have that fit his mechanic. And I think I had some success, but the thing about KO is you can have success because you're lucky and not because you built a good deck or set yourself up with a deck that's consistent. And that's because, sometimes you're just going to roll a 5 or 6 and your attack is going to get doubled, and there's not a whole lot of mechanics in the game that allow people to take too many of those or mitigate those in a 20 hit point Blitz format. But I think the recipe for success for him is to actually realize that if you're going to play Rhinar and do the Intimidate thing, that's not really what you want from KO. And so early on, when I was first playing KO, I basically copied 90% of the list from Rhinar, threw in some of the new cards, and it's just not as consistent of a deck because you can't. His ability is about having big attacks, and you think that would fit naturally with the Intimidate mechanic, but it kind of doesn't, because I would rather, or it seems to be more consistent to, if I can double my attack once in a while and force you to play, that's better than the intimidate mechanic where you're going to get your cards back at the end of the turn anyways, which is part of why I like KO, or I'm learning to like KO a lot better than I even like Rhinar, who I already have a great fondness for, is because I kind of like the random variance of sometimes I'm just going to get lucky and hit you really, really hard. I think it's a more consistent deck overall. And it lends more to kind of how I had started to build Rhinar, where my thought was I can block with two cards, I can play a card and pitch one. And this deck has a lot more yellow than I would have thought. I think I kind of avoided yellows early on when I was learning the game because it kind of seemed like red does more and blue lets me do more. So that's what I'm going to do. But I think, especially with KO, even more so than Rhinar, trying to set up a go wide mechanic where I can block with a card, pitch with a card, attack with a card, and then swing the club sort of thing. And it relies on a lot of some go again, but a lot of it leans into using the pants because the Scabskin Leather's 50% chance to have more than one attack in a turn. And you don't have to go crazy with it. I think that most of the time when I use the leathers, it's because I'm happy with if I roll the one and I have no turn, it's because I have a defense reaction that I was gonna arsenal anyways. So I'm just not going to do damage this turn, but I'll be set up for next turn. Or I wish I had more of them, but I think the Tome of Fyendal, I'm not sure how to say that actually, is great for Brute specifically, since Brute has so many different ways to get go again or get extra actions. Starting off your turn with the Tome when you have extra actions to draw extra cards and gain hit points equal to the cards in your hand, and then be able to play out your turn is super fun way to play Flesh and Blood.
Okay, and then I do see on here. So I remember early on you were playing the claws, and I see here you're playing the club. So what led you to that decision?
I don't think there are enough mechanics right now to make it consistently pay off for the clubs. Because right now,
The claws, you mean?
in the games that I've played, the claws have only really benefited from the Blood Rush Bellows play, where you're getting the +2, and that when you play that card, if you discard a 6, your clubs, or I'm sorry, your claws hit for 5 each, but you still have to have 4 resources to get that. And don't get me wrong, if you have 4 resources, it's awesome. You can do 10 damage on 2 attacks. But there's other ways to get multiple attacks that are easier to accomplish and with less resources. So right now, as it is, I don't think there's enough brute cards that fit the claw playstyle. So what I've done is I went back to the club because it's a cost 2, and which is the same cost as the claws, but it does more damage base. It does 4 instead of 3 base, and I feel like there's more ways to get to multiple attacks in a round when you're mixing an attack card with go again and then pitching for a club versus you have to have pitched a 6 card for the claws that have go again. So even to have 2 attacks with the claws, you have to have somehow discarded a 6 from a different mechanic like Blood Rush Bellows or Primeval Bellows or something like that, which costs you a card. And then that gives you go again, but then you still have to pay for 4 resources with already having lost at least 2 cards. And it's not that it's not doable, it just seems really hard to kind of set up. And without Blood Rush Bellows, you're setting up this turn where you've spent at least 2 cards and then having to spend 4 resources to attack for 6. So it just seems really under curve versus what you can do with just the normal attacks in and of themselves, or when you're just swinging the club for 4. I think gets you more value right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, 4. We all know 4 is a very important number in FAB, right? So
Yeah, and I think that's the other part of it is just that one extra damage. It's getting through if they only block for three. If they really can't afford to take it, you're taking two cards. So that magic number I think is very on point.
Yeah. Okay, well, fair enough. Okay, well, I think we went both through both the guys. Any other advice for everyone out there trying to either learn how to play these guys or learn how to not lose to them?
I don't know how to tell you how not to lose. Because I think in either Rhinar or Kayo, there's either deck variance that's going to lead to the success of Rhinar. If he gets a really good combo in hand, there's not much you can do because he's going to get the cards out of your hand and you're just going to eat whatever he gives you. And same thing with Kayo. Try to set yourself up to where when that big tournament happens, when I've lost with Kayo, it's not necessarily because I wasn't lucky with my six attacks. To a certain degree, it is because it does feel bad when you have something that would have hit for eight and then suddenly it's only hitting for four, so you are losing that value most of the time. But more often than not, it's been when players have successfully mitigated enough to where they could eat that big attack and then go about their still have a full set of cards. And KO does start at 19 versus 20, which is not a huge disadvantage, but I think that with KO, it's just if you can consistently get cards out of his hand and get one or two cards by having a consistent deck that's doing 4 or 5 damage every attack or multiple attacks in a turn, that's how where KO is going to lose because KO needs the resources to either set up a big attack or go wide. And then same kind of goes true with Rhinar because Rhinar is very resource hungry. I think KO you can build not to be as resource hungry. So the problem with you have to get into their hand with Rhinar because they're so resource hungry with their attacks and they're built very much on going big. If you can keep them from going big and they just swing with their club every turn, then I think that's a win condition against Rhinar.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well, I think that'll about do us today. We're at 30 and change, so that's a good cast. So thanks for joining us, and everyone, thank you for tuning in as well. Make sure to let Josh know in the comments how excited you are that he's joining the team, as well as tell him what he's right and what he's wrong about Brute. Let him know.
Yeah, I accept any criticism for my deck building. That's one thing that there's not a lot of resources out there for with this game, which is very different from Destiny, where there's a lot of places you can look for ideas. I could have a completely wrong build. I'm open to any recommendations or harsh criticisms about how I've decided to build these guys.
Yeah,
So I
well,
can
and
learn
we
from
did
it.
see two. Well, it was two Rhinars in the top 8 at New Zealand this last weekend, right? So we'll do a breakdown of those at a later point.
Oh, I was very happy to
So
see
yeah, we'll
that.
go through. We can do a breakdown of those at some point and reevaluate. But all right, anything else before we get out of here today, man?
No, I'm happy to have joined the team. I appreciate you bringing me on, and I look forward to making some
Yeah,
awesome
me
fab
too.
content.
All right, well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Make sure you're liking and subscribing to let us know that you want the content to continue. And if nothing else, y'all, go Commando.
Go Commando.